Hello. Tonight I'm taking the Chateau Musar to a restaurant for dinner with some friends and colleagues, and I thought I would share that with you first. It's a 2003. Uh, from I have a stash of them, as you know. I'm a big fan of the wine, and some of these wines I've traveled back and forth between here and Lebanon, but they seem to do this trip very, very well. Uh, so Chateau Musar, as we've discussed in the past, to me it's one of the two or three top wines in Lebanon. It's grown in the Bekaa Valley, and then vinified and aged and bottled on the mountains of Mount Lebanon, facing the sea. It's a mix, pretty much equal parts of Cabernet Sauvignon, Cinsault, and Carignan. It's a really interesting mix, not very common, but the makers believe that between the structure of the Cabernet, the body, and the Carignan, and the finesse of the Cinsault, you've got a pretty good harmonious blend, which happens to be true. And the mix, as we've discussed before, really that blend ages very, very, very well. So this is probably still a youthful wine, although there's no harm in having it. 2003 was an interesting year. It was sort of very, very wet, the winter. Then the spring was very dry. The summer was hot, although not as hot as in France. So at the end of the day, you had pretty good concentration because the yields were lower, but still enough balance. It wasn't like overdone from a heat point of view. As you know, these wines, stay in the winery for a very long time. They ferment for a few months in concrete, then they get aged separately. The varietals in wood barrels for a year. Then they get blended. Then they get to sit in cement tanks for another year, and then they get bottled, and then they're released like 4 years later. So we're talking 6 to 7 years after harvest. Sometimes, as we discussed, I think for 2010, if they're not ready to be released, they just won't release them. And you can have a 1 year being released before the one after, if that one after wasn't ready to be released. It's a great job, I guess, to have to taste all these bottles and see if they're ready to go. Anyway, I don't know if you see the color, but it's sort of light, not very light. It's clear, it's light, although it's an unfined and unfiltered wine, but I think the sediment is all in the bottom. It's got a little bit of that brick color that comes with age, although it's also common to Musar in general. It's not very alcoholic. These wines never are. It's usually between 12 and 13%. And they were it's just kind of a little bit of that muddiness, but I like that because it gives it life on the nose. It's just really and I was surprised when I first opened it, because often the Musar, you first open it, it's kind of a little musty, but this one just right off the bat, it's sharp, it's fruity, but not too much. It's got a little bit of that Eastern spicy, not necessarily Far Eastern, but Middle Eastern, and it's got some of the currant and cherry. It's sort of mild, not very sharp nose to it, and maybe a little bit of smoke, a little bit of cigar. I guess they would call it cigar box. That sort of you feel from the old tobacco impregnating the wood, which is all very typical of a Musar. It's an interesting mix, and it comes together really, really well. Let's give it some more air. It's got that sweetness that comes under the rest of the stuff that you get on the nose, and we're going to see what happens in the mouth. Very strong attack, very nice finish. What's striking in the finish, I'm going to start with the finish, is the tannins that you still feel on your tongue and in your throat, and they're very fine, so you feel them, but they're not obnoxious, and they sort of numb you a little bit. You can feel them coating your tongue, but at the same time, you still have the fruit that's in the back of your throat, and that's really just very nice. And the sweetness I talked about before, and we've talked about this, I think, with Chateau Musar and other tastings. It's got a little bit of that Maderization. I know it sounds like a bad word, and it is generally, but it is a little bit of that dried fruit, you get in a sort of sweet wine. You got a little bit of a hint of that, and it's very typical of the red Musar, I think. And it's just, again, one of the elements that makes it really unique. Now, I opened this not too long ago, a couple hours ago, but over dinner, I'm sure it's going to evolve quite a bit, and it's going to really do what a Musar does during an evening. It's, again, very typical. It evolves, it adapts to the food you're having, it keeps intriguing you, and you keep wanting to go back for more in case you missed something. And that's one of the things that make this wine overall, I think, so special to me and to many others around the world. Let's just take another sip. It's unique. Again, that blend is unique. That little touch of Madeira is unique. The fruit is there, a little bit of spiciness, but mild spiciness. It's all just comes together in a very, very nice way. It's hard to compare it to anything else, but it's just something that is always quite an experience. Anyway, we'll see you later.